Did you know that Workforce magazine has said that it costs American corporations $6.8 billion a year because their employees have marital distress at home? So all the times you think you go to work and you leave your problems behind you and you're perfectly rational and reasonable, it's not working. $6.8 billion a year. And the Institute of the American Family has said that the average loss of work is 15 days a year for every single employee because they have marital problems. They're not communicating. They hate each other. It's much worse than not communicating. They really aren't getting along, and they don't know what to do about it. So today I'm going to explain why these 4 colors will make your life so simple. This is Herrmann brain dominance. There are 4 different human thinking styles. And what's so fascinating about it is we don't even realize that we're in one of those thinking styles when we have every thought about everybody that we don't like. So whether you're the owner of a corporation and you're having problems with management, whether it's because you're at home and you're having difficulties communicating with your family, it's all because of your thinking style. And invariably, the people that think like you are very close friends of yours. You understand them. There's really no breakdown. And the people who are not like you are being treated like aliens. So it's very, very simple. There are 4 types. This is the rational leader. Someone who thinks about money, someone who thinks about time, someone who thinks about numbers. And as I describe this to you, think about who you know in your life, who works for you in your company, and whether you're this type. And the most valuable part of Herrmann brain dominance has been for me to understand that we are all equally valuable, that a world in which we were all thinking the same way would be far, far less interesting, and how do we maximize these differences and these strengths. So this is a numbers person, very rational, very analytical, normally an engineer, normally somebody who is pragmatic. Now, the very next one is organized, someone who is systematic. So in other words, if you're very rational, you're going to need somebody to handle the details for you. You're going to find somebody who's organized and systematic. And this is really interesting. I had a conversation yesterday about reliability. And I was letting the person know that reliability is not a good or a bad. It's this thinking preference is always reliable. So if you know that you're always reliable, you'll be there on time, you can be counted on, this is one of your key thinking preferences. And it's really important because don't expect it from someone who is a creative, visionary designer, which is this. And the only reason that they're using colors, it just makes it easier for reference. So this is the upper right brain thinking preference, and it's a visionary, conceptual, holistic person. Someone who's always thinking about the future. Now you can see that that would be in direct conflict. Someone who's organized isn't thinking about the future because you can only organize right now. You can only do your step-by-step, one thing at a time. But this person is always thinking about the future and may have a lot of difficulties today, unless with some support, management, teamwork, whether it's in the family or in the office, they can be brought back to today. This is the interpersonal. This is the salesperson. And it's really interesting because any corporation, any company that thrives and is doing billions of dollars of business absolutely has to have all types. So even if you're wondering why is it true that there's nobody better than anyone else, there's no type that's preferable to anyone else, you understand that in a corporate situation, you've got to have somebody raising money and thinking about money. Because we know that that's what business is. The way that we know if our product is successful is people want to buy it. But then who's going to sell it is the interpersonal. And this is a completely different way of thinking. That's why those two, often those departments, those two individuals are often at loggerheads. Now, who is going to have either the creativity to create the product, because you have to have a product that you're selling, is going to be somebody who's either visionary or who has a holistic view of how the whole company is going to operate. And then this is the person who's staying late at the office until midnight sometimes doing the paperwork. The person that comes in on the weekend, the person that's linked up on the network and the computer, this is the dependable, reliable person that does all that detail work. Now, how does this change our way of communicating. Because if we say that $6.8 billion are lost a year because of marital distress, what do we do about it? Well, the first thing is to understand, now we've seen this in a corporate situation, how this might be true of different people that work with us. Now we begin to understand how to communicate with these people. And if you think about your own family, if you think about your own working environment, it's very beneficial to get an idea of the different styles of communication. Well, if the rational person's all about numbers, then that person isn't interested in a long story. An interpersonal person's going to be really chatty and engage with you, and if you've ever been sold anything, you know what that's like. So you've got these two options. Very pragmatic, numbers, quick, and lots and lots and lots of conversation. So I hope you're thinking about yourself and the people in your life and the people in your office environment right now. Because when you design a strategy, when you design a communication style that works for yourself and doesn't include the needs of other people, then you have a problem. For example, let's just, if we can, get an idea of who you think you are more or less right now from the little that you've learned about Herrmann brain dominance. And since I know a good number of you, it will be very interesting to see where you raise your hand. So if I could see, please, from a raising of hand, if you think you are mostly rational, analytical, money, numbers. If you're a CPA, this is definitely who you are. Thank you. Okay, great. Good. Then the next one would be detail-oriented, very pragmatic in terms of step-by-step. If you have to have things done, first one, then you'll get to the next thing, then you'll get to the next thing. Okay, nobody here. Interesting. The third is interpersonal. That means you're very outgoing, you're warm, you're not afraid of new people, new surroundings. You might be a writer, you might be a minister, anything that has to do with people. You're allowed to have two, because it's just first you'd have one and then you'd have a second as a preference. Thank you. Interesting. And some of you are waiting for the futuristic one, holistic, visionary. Now, I should tell you that 9%, thank you, 9% of the population is quadridominant. And that's called the CEO mentality. And that doesn't mean that they do everything themselves. That doesn't mean they can. But it means that they have an ability to understand each of these ways of thinking. Each way of thinking is perfectly normal and familiar to them, and they have an easier time managing large corporations because there's not going to be any department that's going to be speaking an alien tongue, if you will. Now, in communication, the most crucial part of communication is guessing what the other person's all about. As you know, we tend in communication to think about ourselves. Well, what do I want you to know? Well, that's not going to be real interesting to you after a while. You're really interested in what you want to know. Perhaps I have information that's important for you. Perhaps I have information that you came here to learn today. Now, how in the world would I know what that is unless you've told me? Well, the other technique that I use that's very, very important is called nonviolent communication. And in nonviolent communication, which was developed by Dr. Marshall Rosenberg 40 years ago, the most important principle is self-empathy and empathy. Because if I'm attempting to communicate with you and I'm so busy over here with some drama that's going on, whether it would be the drama of marital distress costing corporations $6.8 billion a year, whether it would be my own drama costing me 15 days of work a year, when instead I don't have to go to work 15 days. Maybe I have vacation time, but I could be out having a good time, and so could you. So the idea is to come to peace, which is the principle of nonviolent communication. Now, we understand there are 4 thinking types. This is a very, very, very interesting shift that we have in strangers. When we meet strangers, normally, we're looking for some way to connect with them. Even if you're not an interpersonal, if you're not that red salesman, entertainer person, you want to connect with people. Otherwise, you'd stay home. But it's so tempting to think that if someone is not like me, that there's just a little bit something wrong with them. And we've all had that. It can be our family, it can be our boss, it can be ourselves. So if you can learn how to disconnect from these judgments, whether they're self-judgments or judgments of others, can you see that your life would be a very different experience? You could have peace. You could have a whole lot more fun. Now, I say this because I work with a lot of clients, and it's very difficult when someone comes originally and they're talking either in coaching about a relationship they're in or the last relationship they were in, and the pain and the disconnection and the loss and starting all over again. Nobody wants to go through that. That's never something that we prefer. We don't choose divorce. We don't choose losing a job. We don't choose having to make a change, though that happens. But what we can do is find peace in any situation. And by doing that, we understand what our own needs are, thinking about Herrmann brain dominance. That makes it most simple. If you know that your need is futuristic, if you know that you're a visionary, if you know that you're only interested in the context, and you know that you're speaking to someone who's very, very dollars and cents oriented, you've got to develop some kind of a strategy that allows you to have a conversation. Because it is simply not going to work for you to be speaking one language to someone who doesn't speak that language. And if you've got this asset of understanding four thinking styles, then you're way ahead of the game. Now, in self-empathy, the very, very first thing you do is you think of what you're feeling because of a need that is not being met. And today's a perfect example. This is part of life. I mean, you're here. You could be feeling excited because you had a need for this information and I'm providing it. You could just as easily be bored because you have a lot of other things on your mind, or maybe you've heard me discuss this with you because you're one of my clients and you'd really like me to move on to something different. It doesn't matter whether you're feeling excited. It doesn't matter if you're feeling bored, in the sense that self-empathy has tremendous impact in either case. So the process of self-empathy is to take a look inside silently, and I would love you to do that now, because this is as much an example of life as anything. See what you're feeling, and then think, once you have an idea what you're feeling, think of what unmet need there might be. Now, there are many needs, so there's a list of about 40 needs that we use, but for our purposes today, the basic needs are financial security, emotional safety, physical well-being, peace, meaning, autonomy, which is to say independence. Those are all of the basic necessities that we feel. And so you may be feeling excited, as I said, because you have a need for information. And then in self-empathy, you take a deep breath. Because what you're attempting to do is unstack yourself from all these emotions and really get present. And that's why I'm actually explaining this to you first, because this is a tremendous, tremendous gift that I use every single day, all the time. And then you see what the next emotion may be. Well, maybe you're feeling a little worried because you have a need for clarification. Maybe there's something that I'm discussing that's not really clear. And so you've kind of filed that away to ask me later, but in the meantime, you're feeling a little worried, which we have this experience very, very often. Maybe you're actually feeling distraught because you have a need for either financial safety or physical well-being, and you've got an issue that you walked in the door with, but you wanted to come and hear the talk, and you're trying to ignore it, but in fact, it's not really very successful. Some of us have been taught that we can just kind of operate on top of some tremendous problem. It doesn't really work. What we actually can do instead is use self-empathy. With self-empathy, you can just look inside and see, I'm enraged because I have a need for emotional safety, and the person I'm in a relationship with just did this crazy thing this morning, and then I take a deep breath. And I would process through that. Now, it's not necessarily going to, in 5 minutes, mean that you're not going to have enough distress in your own life that you're going to go to work every day and be perfectly healthy. But what I have seen with my clients is a tremendous shift, just a tremendous shift in quality of life. So the more that you understand what your thinking preference is and what your needs are, the more you understand that about the people at home and the people that you work with, and the more you practice self-empathy, life can become a very, very different place to be, because you now are knowing that you're able to control your response to things. It's not a question of life becoming a different place. The question is what will trigger you and what won't trigger you. And then what do you do when you are triggered? How are you going to respond when your boss makes a request and you have absolutely no idea how you're going to meet that request? And all you do immediately is you get triggered into a conversation about either hating your boss or looking for another job. And it's not helpful to you, and it's certainly not helpful to the company. So there are so many options, but the easiest and the quickest is to just give yourself a lot of self-empathy in the moment. And I've had situations, I've had clients who have problems, and at the moment that they're telling me the problem, I can either be in a state of tremendous shock. There are some stories that I've heard that are quite overwhelming. So I give myself self-empathy, and I'm able to really come back and be present, be with the person, and then also come up with a strategy. But long before you want to think of strategies, that's when it is so essential to be able to come back and be present with yourself. And though I'm not suggesting you're going to get rid of the $6.8 billion problem overnight, you're going to find that as the head of a company or the head of a division or even the head of a family, you're going to have a much greater success.